The sun was a hammer, beating down on Sarah's cracked lips. Each breath felt like swallowing sand. She lay sprawled on the baked earth, the desert stretching around her like a monstrous, indifferent god. Her throat felt like a leather pouch, empty and useless. Her skin screamed. The sun had already stolen its moisture, leaving behind a canvas of angry red blisters. Every inch of exposed flesh was a burning torment. She tried to shift, to find a patch of shade, but even the smallest movement sent stabs of pain through her body. Despair was a cold stone in her gut. It whispered insidious thoughts. Asterisk, give up. Rest. The desert will claim you soon enough. Asterisk, she remembered the faces of the men, their greed-twisted smiles as they rode away, leaving her with nothing but a canteen half filled with lukewarm water. Water that was now gone. Her eyes, swollen and bloodshot, struggled to focus. The horizon shimmered, a cruel mirage of water and hope. She closed them, tried to conjure a memory of coolness, of rain, of anything but this burning, endless expanse. But the desert was relentless, invading her mind with its heat and its silence. She was alone, utterly, completely alone, and the desert was waiting. The sun faded, replaced by the cool darkness of memory. It started with gold, not glittering nuggets scattered on the ground, but a vein, thick and yellow, snaking through the rock face like a golden river. Sarah had found it, tracing the glint of metal with a calloused finger. She'd shown the men, trusting them as partners. There was Caleb, the smooth talker, always with a joke and a wink. Then there was Silas, the muscle, quiet and watchful. Jedediah was the oldest, claiming wisdom and experience. And finally, young Thomas, eager to prove himself. They'd celebrated that night, sharing whiskey and dreams of riches. But the dreams turned sour quickly. Greed, like a desert weed, took root and choked the camaraderie. Caleb started whispering about cutting Sarah out, claiming she was slowing them down. Silas just watched, his eyes glinting with calculation. Jedediah, ever the pragmatist, weighed the options, his loyalty shifting with the prevailing wind. Thomas, torn between his admiration for Sarah and his desire to be accepted, remained silent. The betrayal came swift and brutal. A shove, a thud, the taste of dust and blood. Then the sound of hooves fading into the distance, carrying away not just the gold, but Sarah's trust, her hope, and her life. The half-filled canteen was the final insult, a mocking gesture of false mercy. The line between reality and nightmare blurred. Sarah saw water shimmering just beyond her reach, heard voices calling her name, felt the cool touch of rain on her skin. But each time she reached out, the illusion vanished, leaving her more parched, more alone. Vultures circled overhead, black silhouettes against the blinding sky. They were patient, waiting. Once, a coyote crept close, its eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. Sarah screamed, a raw, animal sound that startled the creature, sending it slinking back into the shadows. She began to crawl, inch by agonizing inch. She dragged herself across the scorching sand. Her hands and knees bled, leaving a trail of red in her wake. The sun beat down, turning her skin to leather. Each breath was a struggle, a reminder of her failing body. Days and nights bled together. She ate insects, anything to keep going. She licked dew from rocks, savoring each precious drop. She clung to the memory of the men's faces, their betrayal fueling her desperate crawl. The thought of revenge, a dark, burning ember, kept her alive when everything else had failed. It was the only thing that mattered now. It was the only thing that could save her. Just when her body threatened to give out completely, when the burning ember of revenge flickered close to dying, she saw it. A splash of green against the monotonous brown, an oasis. Not a grand, life-giving lake, but a small pool of water fed by a hidden spring, surrounded by a few scraggly trees. Hope surged through her, a jolt of electricity. She crawled faster, driven by a primal need. The water was cool and tasted of earth, but it was life. She drank deeply, ignoring the pain in her throat. She soaked her blistered skin, letting the water seep into her wounds. As she rested in the shade, the burning ember of revenge flared into a roaring flame. The water had not just quenched her thirst, it had fueled her hatred. She saw the faces of Caleb, Silas, Jedediah, and Thomas, their smiles now twisted into masks of pure evil. Mercy was a weakness she could no longer afford. They had shown her none, and she would return the favor. The desert had tried to claim her, but it had failed. Now, she would use the desert against them. She would become its weapon, its vengeful spirit. She would hunt them down, one by one, and make them pay for their betrayal. The oasis was not just a source of water. It was the wellspring of her wrath. The oasis became her school, the desert her teacher. Sarah learned to hunt jackrabbits with stones, her aim becoming deadly accurate. She scavenged for edible plants, recognizing the subtle signs of life hidden beneath the arid surface. She studied the stars, learning to navigate by their light, the constellations her guide. Her clothes, once a simple dress, were now tattered and torn, patched with scraps of leather and cloth she found along the way. Her skin, once fair, was now bronzed and scarred, etched with the map of her survival. Her hair, matted with dust and sweat, was cropped short, a practical necessity. But the most profound changes were internal. The softness in her eyes had hardened into steel. The fear that had once gripped her heart was replaced by a cold, unwavering determination. The desert had stripped her bare, revealing a core of resilience she never knew she possessed. She moved with a newfound confidence, her steps sure and purposeful. She was no longer the woman who had been left to die. She was something else entirely, a creature forged in the fires of hardship, a hunter stalking her prey, a ghost rising from the wasteland. The desert had tried to break her, but instead, it had made her stronger. It had made her into a weapon. Sarah left the oasis, a ghost in the desert wind. She followed faint trails, discarded cigarillos, broken wagon wheels, rumors whispered in dusty saloons. She learned to read the land, to see the stories etched in the sand. She found their tracks leading to a boomtown called Redemption, a place built on vice and greed. There, she heard tales of four men throwing around gold, buying drinks for everyone, and generally causing trouble. Caleb was gambling away fortunes. Silas was buying up property. Jedediah was hiring thugs to protect his investments, and young Thomas seemed uneasy, haunted by something. Sarah stayed in the shadows, gathering information. She learned their routines, their weaknesses, their alliances. She saw the way they looked over their shoulders, their paranoia growing with each passing day. They knew they had done wrong, and the guilt was eating at them, making them careless. A discarded poker chip with Caleb's initials, a torn piece of fabric from Silas's shirt caught on a cactus, a whispered argument between Jedediah and a local merchant. Each clue was a breadcrumb on her trail of vengeance. She was patient, methodical, a predator stalking its prey. The hunt had begun, and Sarah intended to finish it. Caleb was her first target. He was drunk, stumbling out of a saloon late one night, his pockets heavy with winnings. Sarah waited in the shadows, a silent predator. As he passed, she struck a swift blow to the back of his head. He crumpled to the ground, dazed but not unconscious. She dragged him into a nearby alley, the stench of stale beer and urine filling the air. He looked up at her, his eyes widening in disbelief. "Sarah? But you're supposed to be dead." "Not yet, Caleb," she hissed, her voice raspy from disuse. The fight was brutal, a desperate struggle in the darkness. He was bigger, stronger, but she was fueled by rage and desperation. She used her knowledge of the desert, her instincts honed by survival, to her advantage. She kicked dirt in his eyes, bit his hand, used a broken bottle as a weapon. Finally, she pinned him down, her knee on his chest. She could have killed him then, easily, but that wasn't her goal. She pulled out a knife and carved a mark into his cheek, a brand, a reminder of his betrayal. "Tell the others," she said, her voice low and menacing. Tell them I'm coming." Then she vanished into the night, leaving him bleeding and terrified, a living message for his partners in crime. The game had changed. Sarah wasn't just surviving anymore. She was hunting, and they were her prey. Caleb's terror spread like wildfire. He babbled about Sarah, about the mark, about her promise of vengeance. The other men, already uneasy, descended into full-blown paranoia. They barricaded themselves in the saloon, hired extra guards, and eyed each other with suspicion. The gold, once a source of joy, became a burden, a constant reminder of their crime. Silas accused Jedediah of hoarding more than his share. Jedediah, in turn, questioned Silas's loyalty, suspecting him of plotting a double cross. Caleb, nursing his wound and his wounded pride, lashed out at everyone, his drunken rants fueling the animosity. Thomas, however, remained withdrawn, his guilt a silent torment. He tried to reason with the others, to suggest they return the gold, but his pleas were dismissed as weakness. He was trapped between his conscience and his fear of his partners. Their alliance, once forged in greed, began to crumble under the weight of guilt and fear. They argued, they threatened, they turned on each other like rabid dogs. Sarah didn't need to lift a finger. Their own actions were tearing them apart. She had planted the seed of doubt, and it was blossoming into a deadly harvest. The men were now their own worst enemies. Their paranoia was her greatest weapon. Silas was next. He was tasked with writing out a check on their gold mine claim, a nervous errand after Caleb's attack. Sarah knew he would be jumpy, expecting an ambush at every turn. She used that fear against him. She didn't confront him directly. Instead, she played with his mind. She left subtle signs, a broken twig, a coyote carcass arranged in a strange pattern, the faint sound of whistling in the distance. Each sign was designed to amplify his paranoia, to make him question his sanity. She dug camouflaged pits filled with sharpened stakes. She strung tripwires connected to noisemakers, creating phantom ambushes that sent him scrambling for cover. She used the desert itself as her weapon, turning its harsh landscape into a deadly playground. Finally, she lured him into a narrow canyon. As he rode through, a carefully placed rock slide blocked his path. He was trapped. Then, she appeared on the canyon rim, a silhouette against the setting sun. He raised his gun, his hand shaking. "Show yourself," he yelled, his voice cracking with fear. Sarah didn't speak. She simply released a swarm of angry bees from a hidden hive. As Silas swatted at the stinging insects, she vanished again, leaving him to the mercy of the desert and his own terror. He was alive, but broken, his confidence shattered, his mind unraveling. He knew she was out there, watching, waiting, and that was worse than death. Before the goal, before the betrayal, Sarah was different. But even then, there were hints of the woman she would become. She grew up on a remote ranch, her father a gruff, taciturn man who taught her skills most girls never learned. He taught her to track animals through the wilderness, to read the subtle signs of their passage. He showed her how to shoot a rifle, her aim becoming as steady as his. He taught her to fight, not with delicate grace, but with brutal efficiency, using every advantage she could find. "The world ain't kind to women, Sarah," he'd said, his voice rough but his eyes filled with a quiet love. "You gotta be tougher than the men if you want to survive." He told her stories of his own past, of battles fought and enemies vanquished. He spoke of the Apache, their skill at tracking, and their ferocity in battle. He taught her some of their techniques, whispering secrets passed down through generations. Sarah had dismissed it as just stories, as old man's ramblings. But the lessons had seeped into her bones, lying dormant until the desert awakened them. Now she understood. The tracking skills, the fighting techniques, the unwavering determination. It was all part of her, a hidden strength waiting to be unleashed. The desert hadn't created her. It had simply revealed what was already there. A survivor, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. Jedediah and Thomas, the last two, knew their time was running out. Caleb's marked face and Silas's shattered mind were grim reminders of Sarah's relentless pursuit. They abandoned redemption, leaving behind their ill-gotten gains and fleeing into the desolate hills. They found refuge in an abandoned mine, a dark and claustrophobic place echoing with the ghosts of forgotten dreams. They boarded up the entrance, set up makeshift defenses, and waited, their fear a palpable presence in the stale air. Jedediah, ever the pragmatist, tried to maintain control, barking orders and rationing supplies. But even his resolve was cracking under the strain. He knew Sarah wouldn't stop, that she would hunt them to the ends of the earth. Thomas, consumed by guilt, barely spoke. He wandered through the tunnels like a ghost, his eyes haunted by the memory of Sarah's betrayal. He knew he deserved this, that he was complicit in her suffering. They were trapped, not just in a mine, but in their own guilt and fear. The gold, the reason for their betrayal, was now worthless, a heavy weight dragging them down. They had sought riches, but they had found only despair. They had thought they could escape their past, but Sarah was their past, and she was coming to collect. The mine, meant to be their sanctuary, was becoming their tomb. Sarah arrived at the mine under the cover of darkness. She moved silently, a shadow among shadows, her senses heightened, her focus absolute. She had tracked them for weeks, and now, the moment of reckoning was at hand. She didn't bother with stealth. She didn't need it. She kicked down the barricaded entrance, the sound echoing through the mine shafts like a thunderclap. "Jedediah, Thomas," she roared, her voice filled with years of suppressed anger. "Come out and face me." Jedediah emerged from the darkness, his face grim, a shotgun clutched in his trembling hands. "This doesn't have to end like this, Sarah," he said, his voice pleading. "It ended the day you left me to die," she replied, her eyes burning with hatred. The shootout was swift and brutal. Jedediah fired first, but Sarah was faster, more accurate. She dodged the blast, returning fire with deadly precision. Jedediah crumpled to the ground, his lifeblood staining the dusty earth. Thomas emerged from the shadows, his face pale and tear-streaked. He didn't raise his gun. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he whispered, his voice filled with remorse. "I never wanted this." "Then step aside," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. He didn't move. He closed his eyes, waiting for the inevitable. Sarah raised her gun, her finger tightening on the trigger. Years of anger, of pain, of betrayal surged through her. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment of justice. Or was it? The mine was silent, save for the drip, drip, drip of water and the ragged breaths of Sarah and Thomas. Jedediah lay still, his eyes staring blankly at the cavern roof. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and death. Sarah lowered her gun, the weight of it suddenly feeling unbearable. She looked at Thomas, his face etched with guilt and regret. He was a broken man, already serving a life sentence of remorse. Caleb was marked, forever bearing the brand of his betrayal. Silas was shattered, his mind lost to the terrors of the desert. Jedediah was dead, his greed having led him to his final resting place. Hadn't she already exacted her revenge? Hadn't they already paid the price? She thought of the oasis, the turning point in her survival. She had vowed to make them suffer, to repay their cruelty with equal measure. But standing there, in the cold darkness of the mine, she realized that revenge was a hollow victory. It didn't bring back what she had lost. It didn't erase the scars on her body or the pain in her heart. She looked at Thomas one last time, his eyes pleading for absolution. She holstered her gun. "Get out," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "and never let me see you again." She turned and walked away, leaving Thomas to face the consequences of his actions, to live with the weight of his guilt. The desert had given her strength, but it hadn't stolen her humanity. Not completely. Sarah walked away from the mine, leaving behind the carnage and the ghosts of her past. The desert wind whipped around her, carrying away the scent of blood and gunpowder. She was still scarred, still marked by the sun and the betrayal, but she was also changed. The quest for revenge had consumed her, driven her to the brink of madness. But in the end, it had also freed her. She had faced her demons, she had survived, and she had emerged stronger, more resilient than ever before. She didn't know what the future held. Perhaps she would seek a new life, find a place where she could finally rest and heal. Perhaps she would continue to wander the wasteland, a solitary figure forever marked by her experiences. But one thing was certain. She was no longer the woman who had been left to die in the desert. That woman was gone, buried beneath layers of hardship and vengeance. Sarah was reborn, forged in the fires of adversity, a survivor who had stared into the abyss and emerged victorious. She walked towards the horizon, the setting sun casting long shadows behind her. The desert stretched before her, vast and unforgiving, but now she no longer feared it. She was a part of it, a child of the wasteland, forever bound to its harsh beauty and its enduring spirit. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. A hope for a new beginning, a hope for a new life, a hope for peace.